Go ahead.
Good evening, Chicago. My name is Adam Dunn, and I'm the publisher of Dunn Books. As you see from this little bio here, I've written a couple of books of my own, but mainly what I do is I look around for where the real talent is, and I was fortunate enough to connect with your local hero, Dominic Martell, whose work I've been following for several decades now, particularly his Pascual March series, which I was always very taken with. And when circumstances permitted me to actually connect with the author and raise the harebrained possibility that I had and banging around in my head for years about resurrecting Pascual and sort of bringing this character into the 21st century, I was fortunate enough to be able to do so and connect with Chicago's own Dominic Martell, author of the Pascual March series, which is now coming back in its fourth installment, Kill Chain. And Dominic Martell has definitely lost none of his chops and has hit a brand new stride with a brand new book. And it is my pleasure to be able to introduce him to you tonight. Take it away.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Barbara's, for hosting this discussion. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a great pleasure to have written and see in print another Pascual book. I had pretty much given it up for dead. I wrote 3 books in that series back in the 90s. They had their moment. They came and went. The paper books were out of print and the ebooks were lost in the long tail. And I moved on to other things. And then Adam contacted my agent and asked if I would be willing to resurrect the series. And what else was I going to say? I had not run out of ideas for Pascual, but Pascual was dormant. He was in retirement. But I was thrilled to have the opportunity to bring him back. And I was also intrigued and challenged by your ideas for where the series might go. The first 3 books in this series, for those who are not familiar with it, Pascual March, aka Pascual Rose, is a repentant ex-terrorist trying to go straight. I got the idea for the series from reading John le Carré's novel, The Little Drummer Girl, which was also made into a pretty good movie. The Little Drummer Girl talks about that subculture of left-wing European youth who got radicalized back in the 70s and 80s, and some of them got involved in terrorism, some of them with the Palestinian groups, others with homegrown European groups like Action Directe or the Red Army faction in Germany. I was very interested in that phenomenon. How does a person get radicalized to that extent? How does a person from a perfectly ordinary background get radicalized to the point where they are able to commit acts of murder, cold-blooded murder? And beyond that, I started wondering, do any of these people ever have second thoughts? Do they ever want to get out of the business? And it turns out that, yes, there have been some cases of people who repented, got out of the business, tried to get out of the business, turned informant. And that struck me as being a really interesting character. Where does that leave you for the rest of your life? What does that do to you psychologically, emotionally, whatever? And I thought that's a really great anti-hero character for a suspense series. And that's where Pascual came from. So I wrote this series of 3 books. The backstory is Pascual was a member of the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, back in the 80s. I knew that I couldn't make him a sympathetic character if he had actually carried out any terrorist killings. So what I did was I gave him a multilingual background. Pascual was raised in Barcelona, educated in New York and Paris, and lived in the Middle East and traveled widely in Europe, including Germany. So he speaks 6 languages fluently, 4 of them with native or near native ability. So what the PFLP did with him was they made him a sort of liaison agent or courier between groups. So I had Pascual in his terrorist career acting as a kind of link between the various European groups and the Palestinian groups, all of whom, of course, were sponsored at several removes, at least, by the Soviets. This was all part of the Cold War. This is all factual. I did a lot of research into 1980s, 70s, and 80s terrorism, and there were links among all those groups. They collaborated, they traded resources and people, and helped each other's fugitives and so forth. So that's the role I gave Pascual. And then I had him have second thoughts, realize that he'd wasted his life. He starts to rediscover his conscience. He sees through this, he sees through the rationale that these groups constructed for their activities, and he has a crisis of conscience. And he defects, and he becomes an informant. He becomes a snitch. So now he's been 2 things that people hate. He's been a terrorist and he's been a snitch. Making that into a sympathetic character was a real challenge. I mean, this is going to be he's going to be an anti-hero, and if he was going to be at all sympathetic, he would have to have a genuine crisis of conscience, and then find a way to atone. So that's the backstory. The first book in that series, the original series, Lying, Crying, Dying, opens with Pascual in Barcelona, living hand to mouth, making a living as a translator and language teacher. And who gets in touch with him but the one person he never betrayed, the only woman he ever loved, another terrorist, beautiful Basque woman, member of ETA, the Basque terrorist organization. So she comes back and she wants him to run away with her. I won't go into the whole story, but that's the first adventure. The second adventure, some French intelligence agents get their claws into Pascual. They find him and they want something from him. He's the only person left who can identify an ex-Syrian terrorist who's now working for a Russian organized crime group. In the third book, Pascual's past, his connections with Syrian terrorism ensnare him in another intrigue. So that's the background of the original series, which was published in the late 90s. Cold War terrorism and the end of the Cold War, the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and the mutation of terrorism into organized crime. All of that ended on 9/11. Pascual's world ended on 9/11. I had recently written the third book in the series. I'd moved on to other things. The world changed, and I pretty much laid Pascual to rest mentally. I'd had some ideas for further books, but now that was all over. That whole world was gone. So then 20 years went by, and my agent called me and said, there's a guy that wants you to revive the series and write more Pascual books. I said, great, that's terrific, let's talk. So Adam gave me a call, and we had a long talk, and what Adam Dunn wanted was to bring Pascual into the brave new world of cyber warfare, cyber security, cryptocurrency, the way that everything being online had changed all of our lives and changed the world. Anytime there's a new technology, the first people to adopt it are the crooks and the spooks. And that is what happened to the internet and our online world. And that is a brave new world and a new frontier for all kinds of intrigue and skullduggery. And so we found a way to get Pascual into that world. Pascual was dormant for 20 years. And first of all, I had to account for that. What happened to Pascual in those 20 years? So I had him go into hiding, basically, at the end of Gitana, the third book in the original series. He has resolved to come clean and write a tell-all memoir with a ghostwriter. And that's where I left the series. I thought, okay, that kind of wraps things up. Well, now I had to rethink that, because celebrity would make him useless or at least certainly diminish his usefulness for the role that I had in mind for him. So I thought, okay, what happened to that memoir? Well, some subtle pressure was brought to bear on his ghostwriter by the agencies involved, and it was decided it would be healthier for both of them to not carry out that project. So at this point, Pascual says, okay, fine. And I have him move into a little Catalan town where he proceeds to settle down with the woman whom he was with at the end of La Gitana. And they settle there for 20 years and raise a son. That's the situation at the opening kill chain. Pascual's been out of the business, out of trouble, living with his head down and off the grid for 20 years. He's working on his computer one night, doing a translation job, and all of a sudden, unless his computer shuts down, his phone buzzes, he picks up his phone and sees a text, come and join us on the terrace. He's got a little rooftop terrace outside his front door. That's how Kill Chain opens. He goes out, and there are two strangers there who have taken complete control of his computer and his phone, and they say, we need you. You're the guy we need for this job. We will pay you €1 million to do this job. Pascual says, you know what? No thanks. I'm out of the business. And they tell him, you know what? We know where your son and your wife are. So really, you don't have much choice. It's the classic carrot and stick approach. So Pascual has no choice but to say, okay, fine, I'll do it. The job is, in essence, a massive money laundering scheme involving cryptocurrency. Pascual takes the job, but immediately starts scheming how he's going to put himself and his wife and his son in a safer place. That's what Kill Chain is about.
I am curious as to your particular take, which you have dramatized in your books, but I'd just like to hear actually the way you would articulate an observed phenomenon since the end of the Soviet Union and the Cold War, which is the evolution, or perhaps it's really just switching hats, the connection between terrorism, or by another word, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter or proxy warrior, and organized crime. That it seems to be the same sword, but each edge seems to be of a slightly different hue or tint. If you turn the blade under the light, you're going to see one is somewhat darker and one is somewhat more radiant with its own sort of inner flame. But we have seen this phenomenon. It's been very well documented in Northern Ireland, all over the Middle East, certainly Iran, Iraq, Syria, all throughout the former Warsaw Pact countries, from Russia through the Balkans, Poland, certainly now through Central Asia, the stands, and Africa, take your pick, honestly. Yeah. There is a sort of, these two seem to be joined at the hip, but again, if one man's, I don't know, one man's mobster might be another man's zealot. How do you view that odd connection that has not seemed to go away?
Well, I just think thugs will be thugs. Some people are thugs. Some people enjoy, or at least learn early on, that they either enjoy violence or they learn early on that it's very useful, and they get used to using it. Those people are thugs. Thugs are always happy to find a justification for their thuggery. They like to feel useful. They like to feel fulfilled. They like to feel they're doing something worthwhile. And the two principal ways of doing that are either money, which is probably the more common way of doing it, If thuggery is rewarded with large amounts of money, it's a tremendous reinforcement. And the other way is ideology, religious or political or whatever. We have, the terrorist gangs, any terrorist group uses ideology. In the Cold War, it was a political ideology. In the currently notorious Islamic or Islamist terrorism, it's a religious ideology, but it's the same thing. It is ideology can give a thug a great deal of emotional reinforcement and a reason to justify his thuggery. When that ideological justification wanes or disappears, as with the end of the Cold War or the hope, fingers crossed, defeat of the Islamic State, what's a thug to do? Well, he might decide that making money is a sufficient rationale for continuing to be a thug and be attracted to that. So there, as you noted, there are many, many cases of the overlap between terrorism and organized crime, because violent people need a reason to be violent. And both of those activities provide ample reason for a violent person to go on being violent. There's an actual, in many cases, it's even the leaders are the same. I mean, a lot of those terror groups that were Soviet sponsors did mutate into Russian organized crime. As you noted, in Northern Ireland, there was a strong Venn diagram overlap between a lot of the Protestant political gangs and organized crime in Northern Ireland, and the same on the Catholic side. Organized crime and terrorism make use of the same people or make use of the same impulses, and that is violence. Thugs will be thugs, and thugs need a rationale for their thuggery. That's the connection that I see.
Okay, well, that's a good abstract skeleton. Let's put some meat on those bones, because this is how I think readers can really access the world that you created through Pascual. And that is, I read a lot of intel memos on this subject. One thing that organized crime groups and terrorist groups have in common is networks. They need to move stuff around from one place to another, often across international borders or across basically no man's lands where there are no borders, and it's law of the jungle or desert. And the great use that political or politically motivated networks have that can be of use to organized crime, and vice versa. It's definitely a two-way street. It's a mutual arrangement. Is these terrific ways of moving men and material around. One that I remember reading is about smugglers who work the Mediterranean off of Sirte in Libya. When the Gaddafi regime collapsed in Libya, these smugglers who had already been working, they'd either been crossing the Med or crossing through some of the mountain ranges in northern Africa across the Libyan or Egyptian borders. They already knew the routes. So if you had to move men, if you had to move material, if you had to move weapons, you had to move money, in that time when physical money was still, cash was king. These were the guys you turned to. And as you know from your time, certainly in Spain, the Straits of Gibraltar are quite a very busy highway of illicit commerce in both directions. Yeah. And I think that moving forward from the 20th into the 21st centuries, those networks sometimes cross over from being physical pathways across mountains or deserts or seas to become virtual ones, where you move the sort of malign cargo or payloads that you're carrying now are data, be they men, material, plans, information, malware, or as you pointed out with crypto, money that just is it's not coins in your pocket that rattle around anymore. But it's stuff that can move much more quickly You don't, if you're moving $1 billion in Bitcoin, for example, you don't have to worry about getting that in duffel bags onto an airplane. But you still have the logistical issue of stealth. If you are a bad guy, you still have to be able to move stuff from point X to point Y quietly without anybody noticing. And the anybody's who would be noticing are not just the guys, the so-called authorities in pursuit of you, but there are other people like yourself who would want to rip you off, and who, if they take your swag, might not take too kindly to you having a beef about it, and they may do something that you may not find unpleasant. So that, I think, is the world that you have Pascual traversing, even though he may have done it physically in the 80s into the 90s. What you have so successfully done now is to show how a terrorist can make use not only of his old physical networks and tradecraft, but now he is layering on the sort of brave new world's tradecraft of how to erase your digital tracks, how to move stealthily, how to basically ditch electronic surveillance. And for an author who was writing a series that was very much rooted in the Cold War and its collapse, I think you, speaking, I have a bit of a bias, but I think you've done a brilliant job of it. And I think that the listeners tonight would really benefit from hearing how you actually tackled that challenge.
Okay, that's a good question, because a lot of it was terra incognita for me. I'm not especially technologically inclined. I'm the classic late adopter. And when it became necessary to move Pascual into the 21st century and become acquainted with all this stuff, I had a pretty steep learning curve. So I basically just started reading everything I could find about, well, basically two areas, cryptocurrency and cybersecurity in general. I read one very good book that I recommend now to everybody that made my hair stand on end. The book called Future Crimes by a guy named Mark Goodman. Came out maybe 3 years ago. But that book just details all of the ways in which our privacy is now compromised. Privacy, security, the security of our bank, everything is compromised. The more we put online, the more is vulnerable, and how weak most of the security is, and how the complexity of the world, the online world, is an enemy of security, because most people don't understand it. The criminals always understand it better than their victims. So that was a real eye-opener, and I used a lot of that, of what I learned in that book. I put a lot of that into Kill Chain, because Pascual's basic problem from page 1 of Kill Chain is he's been thoroughly hacked. Most people at this point are aware that their cell phone can, through malware, be turned into a listening device. As long as you're carrying your cell phone around and it's on, people can eavesdrop on you, track you, know right where you are. He deals with this in the book. Same thing with your laptop. So I had to educate myself about all that. Went on a lot of different cybersecurity websites. I took extensive notes. I opened a file for note taking, which stretched to almost 50 pages by the time I was done. I spent, I don't remember, at least 2 months basically doing nothing but educating myself about the cyber world, which was something I knew not a whole lot about. And then I just started figuring out how Pascual would navigate that, given the initial conditions I had set for him, set up in Kill Chain. The whole experience made me a lot more paranoid about my own security. I beefed up all my passwords, and went and reconsidered, wow, do I really need to have this online? It was an education, not just for the book, but in general. I encourage everybody to educate themselves about cybersecurity, because we really are tremendously vulnerable, and more all the time. So yeah, and then as far as cryptocurrency is concerned, that was a really interesting world. People ask me, I told them, when I would tell them what I was writing about, they'd say, oh, okay, cryptocurrency, I kind of know what that is, but I really don't understand it. How can it be money? What is it based on? And I would tell them, look, money itself is just a fiction. You know, $100 bill. Oh boy, that's money. Why? What's it worth? It won't keep you dry in the rain. You can't eat it. You know, it won't keep you. What is money? It's nothing. Real wealth is not money. Money is a fiction. Paper money is a fiction. The gold standard is a fiction. It's all money is a consensus. You can get enough people to agree to regard something as a standard of value. You've got money. Yeah, that's all cryptocurrency is. It's just a different locus of the consensus for regarding something as value. So, so I tried to educate myself about that. I did hook up with a good consultant for that, a young fellow named Martin Allen, who works for one of the cryptocurrency companies, who was my advisor on the book. I ran ideas past him and sent him chapters to read. And I always sensed a little bit of a, well, yeah, that could probably fly attitude for him. I don't know if I got everything absolutely airtight from the point of view of an expert in the field, but there's nothing preposterous either. He signed off on everything that happened in the book. Let's put it that way. So I think the technology is sound in the book. I think everything that is supposed to work would work in real life. And I hope people learn a little bit from it as well. But yeah, that's the new world, the world of cybersecurity, cyber warfare, all that. That's where the most interesting intrigue and skullduggery are taking place these days. But for somebody writing a suspense novel, you also have to find a way to keep it in the physical world, because a novel about a couple of guys sitting at a keyboard is not very cinematic. It's not very kinetic. I had to find a way to make the action more kinetic. And so, of course, the world remains stubbornly physical. And the things that we want, the things that good guys and bad guys alone want are, you know, the pleasures of the flesh and so forth and so on. The ultimate threat to somebody's well-being is physical. So physical dangers and physical rewards are also prominently featured in the book. The world will always be stubbornly physical, and that's what we want in a suspense novel, is actual physical danger. So that's there too, and blending the two, or seeing how the one is derived from the other, was an interesting part of writing the book as well.
Well, one of the ways that I think that you keep the action going and keep the plot of this and future Pascual novels kinetic, as you say, is by making Pascual, who after all is this sort of linguistic chameleon, he speaks half a dozen languages, but how you figured out how to keep Pascual relevant in an age where human language is less and less so all the time, and ceding ground to machine languages, which are taking over not just the infrastructure of day-to-day life, but also the sort of force projections between state and non-state actors, and the actions of criminals who are now, you know, they can get away. You don't need a car full of crooks with guns. If you have one crook with a laptop who knows how to stack up the ones and zeros, what difference does it make what language you speak? But you found a way to keep the character of Pascual March relevant. How'd you do that?
Well, people still need to talk to one another. They're always going to need to talk to one another. The Russian crooks are always going to be cutting deals with the Calabrians, and the Colombians are always going to be cutting deals with the Azeris or whoever they can be in business with to make money with. And those guys are old-fashioned. They're very conservative. They still want to sit down. I think crooks more than anybody probably, are into face-to-face judgment of people and face-to-face trust. I think personal connections are always going to be supreme in crime. That's how they deal with one another. They have a sit down. I want to look him in the eye and judge him. I want to talk to the man. So that's always going to obtain. And if you're Calabrian and you don't speak Russian, you're going to need an interpreter. So somebody like Pascual, who can converse in half a dozen languages, is always going to be valuable. And that's how that's how we're going to continue to get him in hot water in further books in the series. Is somebody's always going to need him because he's got this perfect combination of abilities. He's got a carefully constructed fake online identity, which is firmly rooted in a real unshakable identity that can't be, it's not going to be falsified by any know your customer procedures. This happens, of course, because Pascual Rose, the terrorist, when he defects and is debriefed by the CIA and Mossad and set up under a new identity, Pascual abandons his original authentic identity, which is firmly rooted in Spanish civil registry documents and things like that. It's unshakable. It's a real identity, and assumes a new identity. This happens before everything is put online. So then, 20 years later, when the bad guys in Kill Chain decide that Pascual is the best guy to do this, it's because they can now construct this online identity for Pascual, which gives him all the things that he needs to operate as basically a shell company administrator with impeccable credentials as a financier based in Dubai. All of that is phony. But when the banks put him through the KYC procedures, the know your customer procedures, it's all traceable back to that unshakable, real Spanish identity of Pascual Rose. So that makes him uniquely valuable. That, along with his languages and his long experience with living by his wits and getting out of scrapes. So this is how poor old Pascual is trapped in this world where this, and one more crucial fact will keep the series going. The CIA owns him because he owes his continued existence to the CIA protection. First, because they set him up in his new identity, Pascual March, and second, because of the situation that is outlined at the end of Kill Chain, and I'll avoid spoilers by going into that. But for the long-term prospects of the series, Pascual is uniquely valuable, and the CIA owns him.
Well, long may he live and run. You want to tell the viewers a little bit about where he's going next?
Yes. I just, as it happens, finished writing a draft of the sequel to Kill Chain, which is entitled Black Chain, play on words of blockchain, technology underlying cryptocurrency. So there's another cryptocurrency angle in this book, but it moves beyond that. The agency comes and needs Pascual in this book to act as the go-between in a ransom deal. The classic go-between is the guy that takes the paper bag full of unmarked bills and waits at the crossroads at midnight for the hostage to be released. This is done as the deal that opens Black Chain is a kind of a hybrid deal. It starts with a hack, a ransomware demand, but rather than demanding Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency, the hackers in this case want a complicated, untraceable deal that's modeled on a Hawala deal. For those that may not know, the Hawala system is a system of payment that is used in South Asia and the Middle East, whereby agents in far-flung places, different cities, have connections of trust. And if you want to, for example, if you are an Arab guy working in Detroit and you want to send some money back to your family in Baghdad, you go to the Hawala guy in Detroit and you give him $1,000 or whatever, And he calls his cousin in Baghdad and says, take $1,000 to this family out in Sadr City. That's how Hawala works. So the deal at the beginning of blockchain is kind of modeled on that. There's an online element, a cyber element with the initial hack, but Pascual is required to be the middleman in the payment deal. Well, the book really gets off and running when that deal goes south because the hackers get hacked. So blockchain is about the hackers being hacked, and then we're off to the races and everything is up for grabs. And the action in blockchain takes us to the eastern end of the Mediterranean, to Greece, and ultimately Turkey.
I'm looking forward to reading it. I hope the audience is too. You want to open the floor up to questions?
Sure.
All right, folks, now's your chance. Have it, Dominic Martell.
Now we're going to see these via text.
I don't know.
So, all right, while we wait for those questions to come in, what else can I tell you about? Oh, here we go. Oh, okay, that's not a question. We thank you for the comment. Adam, can you tell us about the reissue of the first 3 books in the series?
Yes, indeed. These were the motivators for me to follow you. I had seen and read the first book, Lying, Crying, Dying, some 20 years ago when it was first published in this country, and got sufficiently interested to grab the UK editions when they came out right afterwards. Second one being The Republic of Night. Wonderful title, by the way, The Republic of Night. I always love that. And then Gitana, which I had to look up because I had no idea what that meant, and was immediately taken by the sort of kaleidoscopic whirl, or maybe stumble is the better term for Pascual, from sort of what Pascual, as you said, he was an anti-hero. He is not, he's a sort of anti-James Bond. This is not your suave debonair, super spy, super competent jack of all trades. He's not. If anything, he's this kind of bumbling barfly who just sort of stumbles along from one bad situation to the next, and you wonder just how the hell he stays alive, which you managed to elaborate very, very well through these 3 books. But there's also there's the pace of it, and yes, the caper of each, of how you get these very disparate groups of people who are all chasing what they think is the holy grail, which happens to be frustratingly involving this bumbling barfly named Pascual March. And it's, God, if we could just get him out of the way, we would be able to get what we want. And somehow Pascual manages to survive. He endures. And he endures by living on his wits and with his linguistic skills and his ability to sort of blend in and fade away, and not be the super spy, but basically be the very canny gutter snipe who lives on his wits. Pascual made me think of as a 20th century bipedal version of what our mammal ancestors must have looked like, walking between the toes of a T-Rex and managing to somehow stay alive when giants literally roam the earth and beyond. And you always had a knack for doing that. And you did it with this marvelous background color. I remember one of the opening scenes in The Republic of Night where Pascual is being recruited by French intelligence. And they take him out to this lavish meal. They want to, I guess, wine him and dine him. And Pascual, knowing exactly what's going on, decides that he's going to live large for a day. And he orders the most extravagant meal he possibly can, and the most expensive wine on the menu and everything, knowing that somebody else is going to get stuck with the check. And he's probably never going to be able to eat this way again in another year or two. So he just splurges and goes all out, while he just sort of basically tries to tease out whatever information he can from his would-be recruiter. He knows he's being recruited. But he's just savvy enough now, he's been around the block enough times, that he knows what's going on, is going to try to turn the tables and try to retain what little control he can of his otherwise very precarious situation. And you put the reader right there at the table with him. It's like you're a breadstick watching this all happen between these guys. And that is a skill that is fine and rare, and I remembered it for 20 years. And so when rights became available to this series, I jumped, and I'm very, very glad I did. And it's my privilege to be able to bring these gems back. And these were gems of a certain period. They're a certain vintage. The way I describe Pascual March to anybody else is that originally in his incarnation in these first three novels, Pascual March is a creature of the 90s in the sense that his real vintage, although yes, his backstory exists in the 1980s, he is really a creature that exists firmly between the fall of the wall and the fall of the towers. That is the real operating theater that defines the first three novels in the Pascual March series. Now, this fourth one, Kill Chain, is moved well beyond that in time, in not so much in space, although the locale and that sort of kaleidoscopic effect is going to come back into play. But the kaleidoscope now has this other new virtual dimension layered on top of it. This cyber skullduggery and cryptocurrency and a world that Pascual himself doesn't really fully understand, and yet you manage to make the reader believe that, okay, this is how a guy who is definitely from this other time, this other place, this other economy, this pre-digital universe, is now dropped headlong into it and has to figure his way out. And you do it in the way that, as I said, certainly even after 20 years, you lost none of your chops, and Pascual is every bit as appealing now, 20 years on, as he was then. And this is why it's my privilege to be able to publish it. And I hope you, the readers, the reading public out there, are really going to be able to taste that. And by all means, you're not going to understand Kill Chain fully without going back and reading those first three books first, which is why I am reissuing them. First, Lying, Crying, Dying, to go with Kill Chain. And along with Black Chain, you will see The Republic of Night. And then along with the sequel to Black Chain, you are going to see Gitana. And eventually we will have all 6 of these books out. And then, wow, then it's off to the races. And it's really up to you, Mr. Martell, as to where Pascual goes next. But they really are two sides of the same coin. And they're delicious. They literally are. I mean, you should see the meals that Pascual gets into in these books. They really, really are delectable, as are some of the situations that he gets into and somehow manages always to think his way out of.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to give just a little nod to some of my influences. You mentioned the meals. There's a Spanish novelist, Vázquez Montalbán, who wrote a series of private eye novels set in Barcelona, and his hero, Pepe Carvalho, in every book, he was a gourmet cook, and in every book he would prepare a couple of delicious meals, and Vázquez Montalbán would describe how the meal was put together, and your mouth would just water reading the book. So and I don't do anything really close to that with Pascual. He's not a gourmet cook. He's happy with a bocadillo from the bar on the corner. But yeah, he gets taken out to eat at nice places.
Okay. Anything else coming in that we should find? Thank you all so much for joining. Is this where we get the hook? Is this our cue to get off the stage?
I don't know. Let me get my
I don't know.
my straw butter and my cane, and I'll tap dance for a while. All right. That sounds like a sign off. All right. Thank you for watching. Concur. Have a great evening.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Barbara's Books. Thank you, Chicago. Have a good night, and above all, happy reading. Get the book at your local independent bookstore, Barbara's, if you can. Thank you.